I wonder what that was called. The square sausage is called Lauren sausage.
Yeah. No idea. I was hoping you might be able to inform me.
No? Very well. Snarling, thin-skinned and aggressive. That's the verdict of UKIP's campaign chief, Patrick O'Flynn, on the party's new and old leader, Nigel Farage. It comes after a series of rows in the aftermath of last week's disappointing election results for UKIP. They got 13% of the vote, but only one seat. With more details of the civil war that seems to be engulfing the party this morning, here's our Joko.
On the eve of polling day last week, UKIP leader Nigel Farage told interviewers he would be for the chop if he failed to get elected in the Kent seat of South Thanet. And so it proved when he lost out and his party returned just one MP, the MP for Clacton, Douglas Carswell. Now, it emerges that the party with just one MP is riven with serious splits. On Monday, the party's NEC, ruling executive, rejected Nigel Farage's offer to resign. So, after just 3 days, he was back from the political dead. That was followed by a major standoff between senior UKIP figures and Douglas Carswell and others over public money the party is entitled to receive. The Clacton MP flatly rejected the idea of taking hundreds of thousands of pounds of cash and extra office staff, to the annoyance of some at the top of the party. Since then, briefings against the rival factions have been constant, nasty and explosive. Today, in a devastating and very personal attack, the man who directed the party's election campaign, Patrick O'Flynn, told The Times Nigel Farage has moved away from being a cheerful, ebullient, daring politician. He's been transformed into a snarling, thin-skinned, aggressive man. And that Farage was turning the party into a personality cult. O'Flynn blames 2 senior aides. He didn't name names, but he attacked a Tea Party ultra-aggressive American influence. It's believed he's pointing the finger at the party's election strategist, Raheem Kassam, a former staffer at the right-wing American website Breitbart and The Commentator, and Party Secretary Matthew Richardson, a barrister who has spoken at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Washington. They're being blamed for the so-called shock and awful strategy, calculated to fire up UKIP's core vote, though Mr Kassam has told the Daily Politics this morning that this is untrue. It's strategy that was apparently behind Nigel Farage's call during the ITV leaders' debate for foreigners with HIV to be denied treatment on the NHS. Shocking it may have been, but it's left the party suffering some serious collateral damage. Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Robin Brandt. Well, Robin, it sounds like chaos.
It is. I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to describe this as civil war at the very top of the party. And there have been developments just in the last few minutes. Douglas Carswell is saying publicly now that he will not be leaving UKIP to become an independent MP. There's been speculation, rumour about that. He is 100% UKIP, he is saying, and he is staying. I also get the sense from those around him that that briefing against him, also against Patrick O'Flynn, will now stop. I'm told I won't be getting any more calls by those anonymously being very critical of UKIP's only MP. So that's where we are in the last half hour. But as you've described, there are 2 distinct camps in all of this. Carswell, who has a particular problem with that plan to spend that short money. Patrick O'Flynn, who's made that very devastating personal attack in the Times this morning. I think for Patrick O'Flynn, it's more about this unopposed re-election or reinstatement, however you want to describe it, as Nigel Farage as leader. So you've got those 2. You also have one other very prominent figure from UKIP who was very prominent during the election campaign, who I spoke to last night, didn't want to put their name to comments, but they believe as well that some of these senior aides around Nigel Farage are dragging him down. They're way out of control. Half the London HQ, I'm told, want them to go. So that's one camp. On the other side, you have Raheem Kassam, the Chief of Staff, the person you've just seen there, the way he operates, the way he has tried to push the party to a particular style of message. You've got Nigel Farage, of course, and you've got the money men. Aaron Banks, who gave the party £1 million last year. I was talking to him very late last night. He was willing to go on the record. He attacked Patrick O'Flynn, a weak performer, he told me he was during the election, and he said that Nigel needs a rest. Yes, there is work to do in terms of the internal machinery, but he believes Nigel shouldn't have to deal with this kind of petty squabbling, was his words.
Do you think now there is a chance of a leadership contest? Is there much of a push to actually open this up?
Well, ironically, there was a contest about 6 months ago, and Nigel Farage was completely unopposed, and it went through easy peasy, and that was that. I think the big problem for Patrick O'Flynn, and look at his the way he describes the perception that UKIP may be seen as an absolutist monarchy. It is the way that Nigel failed for the 7th time of asking to become an MP, and yet, remember this, many people didn't note it on the night, UKIP won control of Thanet District Council. So people in that neck of the woods in Kent did vote UKIP in big numbers, but they didn't go for Nigel. And I think Patrick O'Flynn in particular believes this kind of unopposed reinstatement is a real problem for the party as a whole, this party that's supposed to be different. It's not supposed to be Gordon Brown all over again in 2007, is it? So perhaps that is the answer, a leadership contest as we head up to the autumn conference later on this year, just like Labour are doing. And Douglas Carswell won't stand. Perhaps Patrick O'Flynn will, but perhaps that is the answer amidst all of this. Perhaps that's the way out. But I have to say as well, those staffers around Nigel Farage, there is growing pressure among elected officials within UKIP. So they're the ones that carry real credibility for some of them perhaps to move on. Common sense should see the day, is the way someone described it to me earlier.
OK, so heads might roll, or people may go, I suppose, voluntarily, if that's what they want to say publicly. What about Farage himself?
Well, I mean, perhaps he should have just had that rest that he told us on the cliffs of Kent on Friday morning. I mean, this is a man who's been campaigning for years and failed in his ambition, as I said, for the 7th time of asking to become an MP. He needs a rest. His back is a very serious injury. He needs a break. But the reality is as well, in terms of leadership contenders, well, you've got Suzanne Evans. For me, she was the anointed one, and yet she didn't really push enough. He is a huge asset to this party. Love him or hate him, he is an extremely effective communicator. We saw that in the ITV debate. He's a huge asset to UKIP as a party. They amassed 4 million votes, remember, across the country. And I think that is the reason, those 4 million votes, that he was persuaded to stay on.
Robin Brandt, thank you.
Thanks, Joko. We're joined now by UKIP's director, Steve Stanbury. You must be the first political party in history to have a civil war with only one MP.
I wouldn't really call it a civil war. Look, there's a robust conversation going on, but what we need to do, obviously, is look at the 4 million people who voted for us, our 50,000 members, and they expect something better and different from this. They, I think, can expect a more professional approach and not the selfish, self-indulgent attacks that we're seeing.
Well, we believe that Patrick O'Flynn was referring to your election strategist, Raheem Kassam, and the party secretary, Matthew Richardson. Do you subscribe to their strategy of shock and awful, as Joko was describing it?
I wouldn't call it that, but I think our election strategy actually proved to be very successful. Of course, it was disappointing, very disappointing, not to get Nigel elected. Not to get
right, but what I'm talking about is this core vote strategy, emphasising the HIV immigration line, attacking the BBC audience that night for being too left-wing. That's what they meant by shock and awful. It was a description of a core vote strategy. Do you subscribe to that?
Absolutely. It was a target seat strategy, and it was a core vote strategy. And indeed, look at the votes, and indeed look at the fact, you mentioned it in your piece there, that we won the council in Thurrock, where I stood over in Gloucester in the Forest of Dean. We won 7 seats, council seats that
Yeah,
night.
but you were out to win parliamentary seats, and if you were targeting them, it didn't work, did it?
And we were, and everybody knows, and many parties were squeezed in the last fortnight by the SNP fear factor. A lot of people said to me, we agree with all of your policies, including about spending NHS money on British people and not spending it on people coming here with no connection with the country. Most people agree with that as a common sense, fair policy. But they said, we're going to vote UKIP locally. We totally support your policies, but we're too concerned and scared about Labour and the SNP. And that was palpable on the doorstep. I think a lot of these people who are making these criticisms perhaps should have get out a bit more and actually listen to what people are really saying.
But you're not listening to what people are saying anymore. Your party is now consumed at the top by attacking each other. I mean, we've had Patrick O'Flynn saying these things about your leader and about 2 of the party's key people. I now see that people on the other side are saying that Mr. O'Flynn has, quote, personal problems, and this may be the manifestation of them. I mean, this is going nowhere except down, isn't it?
Look, I've not come on today, and I'm not going to engage in any mudslinging and any personal attacks. Our 4 million voters, our 50,000 members, they expect more. They expect a professional, well-mannered party.
Well, they're not getting it, are they?
And that's what they need, and that's what they deserve.
Should there be a proper leadership contest?
If people want to challenge Nigel for the leadership, there is a process for doing that, and they should exercise that right, and they should do that. Let's be clear that the NEC was unanimous in rejecting Nigel's offer to stand down.
And were they right to do that, though?
I think they were absolutely right.
So you don't want a leadership contest?
I don't know. I think the NEC were right, and I think the overwhelming majority of party members who made their view very, very clear indeed, absolutely 100% support Nigel. Clearly, he is the right man to take us forward. Don't forget.
But he told us he was standing down.
Yeah, and he did tender his resignation to the NEC, and they rejected that.
But people think it was all a stitch-up, that he knew this was going to happen anyway.
No, absolutely not. I was there. I know that was not the case. We listened to, obviously, the NEC. The NEC are elected by the membership of the party, and indeed, many people across the party said very, very clearly that they didn't want anybody but Nigel to lead them now.
So you don't agree with Patrick O'Flynn's analysis and attack on Mr. Farage?
I certainly don't agree with anybody's attack on anybody. I certainly don't agree with anybody's attack on Nigel Farage.
But what's motivating Patrick O'Flynn, do you think, to say these things?
That's for him to answer. We need to have, obviously, all parties...
Let me just interrupt. We're just seeing some pictures of Nigel Farage, not quite live, but it was earlier this morning.
If the NEC unanimously back me, that's not my fault, is it?
Sounding a bit grumpy.
Well,
he could do with a holiday, could he not?
And he's got to have a holiday, and he deserves a holiday.
Right, but let's just get clear. Do you agree with Patrick O'Flynn or don't you?
No, I do not. I don't agree with the tone of what's been said. Absolutely, I think personal attacks are beneath him and beneath the party, but I don't agree with the strategic analysis such as it is. Clearly, we fought a good campaign. It was the right campaign. We were vindicated in terms of the share of the vote. Indeed, if it hadn't have been for the very successful and real and genuine SNP fear factor, we would have got 5 million votes and indeed would have got a number of MPs over the line.
You're assuming that. We don't know that. There's no evidence that you can say that. But should Mr. Kassam and Mr. Richardson, should they go? Are they toxic? Are they Tea Party toxic at the heart of your party?
Absolutely not. They played an absolutely invaluable role in terms of the strategy, in terms of delivering the campaign. I worked very closely with them, and they did an excellent job. Look, all parties need to have a post-election analysis, a period for reflection. We've got a lot of things to do. We've got 122nd places. We've got to fight an election in London. We've got the No campaign coming up. There are lots of big important things. UKIP has now a clear constituency across the country. Millions of people support us, and indeed more would have voted for us if it weren't for the SNP squeeze.
So if Mr. Kassam and Mr. Richardson shouldn't go, should Patrick O'Flynn step down?
It is for others to consider their positions.
I know that, but I'm asking for your opinion.
I'm not going to do it. It's for him to consider his position.
Well, something has to give, doesn't it? Otherwise, because we understand that Mr. O'Flynn has more words to say, perhaps later today. So both sides are simply pouring petrol on the flames.
Well, what we need is to move on. The NEC has spoken. The membership of the party has spoken in terms of wanting Nigel to carry on.
How do we know that?
We know that from the multiple campaigns on social media, the emails. There was an outpouring of comment coming from the party.
But that's quite unscientific. I mean, the way to have established this would have been to have had a leadership election, wouldn't it? I mean, look, you know what happened to Labour when Gordon Brown was just automatically anointed as leader. Everyone in Labour is now saying we should have had a proper debate about what kind of party we need to be in the future. And we didn't, and that's held us back, and we've now lost a second election in a row. A leadership election would have allowed you to have had that kind of debate and to determine where you go now. But instead, it all seems to have been carved up by a few people at the centre.
No, we need continuity going forward. Nigel obviously tendered his resignation. He's a man of his word. But the NEC unanimously rejected that. It's the right thing for him to carry on.
Was the NEC right to do it? Was the NEC right to reject it, his resignation?
Absolutely they were.
Wouldn't a stronger person like Mr. Farage have said, no, look, I've resigned. I said I would resign. I've said, I'm a man of my word. I've resigned. So why didn't he stick to his word?
He did resign, and then the NEC rejected that resignation. But
but he could have rejected the NEC. He didn't have to follow that. He had told us before the election if he didn't win his constituency, he was resigning. And I think it speaks volumes that although you won the council in his constituency, he didn't win. He's not necessarily the asset you think.
OK, but that happened across the board. I didn't win, or I was up against an 11,000 Tory majority, but we got 7 councillors elected in the Forest of Dean that night. And then
but he was expecting to, you, I assume, were realistic enough to know that you weren't going to win. He was expecting to win in Thanet South.
And of course, it was very disappointing. But quite,
he came third.
But quite clearly,
you can't blame all that on the Scottish nationalists.
Quite clearly, the SNP Fear Factor campaign, very successful.
But he came third.
Yes, not in Thanet South.
No, across the country, people were coming up to me and UKIP candidates everywhere saying, we agree with everything you stand for, we're going to vote UKIP locally, but we're now too scared genuinely about the SNP and Labour. So, and I can understand, actually, people having that concern. It would have been a disaster for our country.
Though a lot of people may have concluded that the best way to stand up to the SNP was to elect UKIP, if you were so minded, but clearly they didn't think that. So Mr Kassam should stay in your view, Mr Richardson should stay, Mr O'Flynn should stay, and Mr Farage stays as leader. So the civil war continues.
We don't need to have, we shouldn't be having a civil war. We should be having a professional, measured, private conversation.
But you're not.
I know, and we should be. And I would say to all of my colleagues...
What's going to bring that about?
And I would say to all of my colleagues that these personal attacks are completely beneath them, unprofessional and indeed selfish and rather indulgent. And our members and our 4 million voters, they can expect more of a party, more of a professional party that UKIP is.
What do you make of it all, Danny Finkelstein?
Well, I think there's underneath it a genuine strategic dilemma. Is UKIP an angry, pessimistic party, or is it an optimistic, outward-looking party, which is what Douglas wants? I think an outward-looking, optimistic UKIP is like hot ice. Right? I think it's obviously designed to be an angry party because there are quite a lot of people that can appeal to. It's now got to be a populist party that moves away from the sort of Douglas's Gladstonian libertarianism. It's inevitable that underneath the personal disputes, which one would have to have a heart of stone not to find hilarious, there is, without any question, a political dispute. I think the personal disputes might be resolvable. Underneath it, the political dilemma is not resolvable. They've got 2 different tasks, and they're incompatible.
It's going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it?
Let's see. I think actually what people are forgetting, that in terms of share of the vote, everybody else went down or had minuscule gains, but UKIP quadrupled its vote. Don't forget, we got more votes.
So why
are you all like, so
combined?
Why are you right?
Not a great success. You've got 1 seat.
So why are you, if that was true, why are you all like rats in a sack?
Personalities get involved. People do have differences about strategy, how to capitalise on the success that we have. But clearly, we've got a lot to do.
All right. When you talk about snarling, thin-skinned and aggressive, it's more than about strategy, I would suggest. Stephen Stanbury, thank you very much. We'll keep across this. We hope that Mr Farage may come on to the Sunday Politics this weekend so we can speak to him.